Hi, Darrell.
Hi, how are
Hello,
you?
Darrell. Nice to see you.
Hi,
It's been a while. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm also good. Thank you.
Come on into the picture, kid. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
In case I forget, thanks for doing this tonight.
Oh, you're welcome.
Absolutely.
Susan's joining in the conversation as well.
Cool.
Great. Now, is live on Facebook now?
Yes, it's on the Unity of Tampa Facebook page. I'm
I
having
shared it
difficulty
on
getting
mine,
it.
Darrell, so you can share it on yours, so it should be easy.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm having difficulty getting onto YouTube, but it looks like it's not going to let me do both at the same time.
It should.
Bring this side over a little and you'll be more in the picture.
Well, I don't know. I've only know how to do Facebook.
Yeah, it's like I'd done the homework on it earlier, but I get the impression that, well, when I go to where
Too much light.
take it to everything else, it just says, it's already live streaming on Facebook, so it's not letting me.
Um,
Hey, Barb. Hi.
Hi.
Did Chautauqua get canceled?
Yes,
Hi, Barbara.
but we're going to do 10 weeks. I'm doing a Zoom 10-week Sunday series.
Very
So
Barbara Williams. Hello, my friend. So nice to see your
Hey.
face.
I haven't seen you in a long time. How are
It's been a
you?
long time, hasn't it? I'm good. Thank you. How are you?
I'm good.
Yay. Lovely to hear.
Hi, Barbara. How are you?
Hi. Hi, Lynette. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Good to see you.
You too.
okay, I think I'm sharing it on my page now.
Okay, great.
Yeah, I'm sharing it on my page also.
Hello. Yes, Faye. Okay. Oh, okay. Got it. Let me see here. I've got got a lot of people joining on right now. So you were trying to join by computer, right? Rather than, and it's not letting you back in? Well, let me check on that. Let me give you a call back.
Hi, Bob,
Hi.
everyone.
Hi, Colette.
Hi, Renee.
Hi, Marilyn.
Okay, we are live streaming on the Unity of Tampa Facebook page as well.
Reverend Bob, I'm having a hard time hearing.
Actually, nobody's talking right now, but we're
You
getting
know,
close to launching here.
You were talking, I
Gonna
could
launch
hardly
in
hear
about
you.
2 minutes. So, yeah.
I don't know why we're not on there. I don't know. I don't know how to do that. Just to turn the camera on. But I don't know.
We'll start here in about a minute. We do have people joining, obviously, so.
How are you doing, Bob?
I'm doing pretty well. How about you?
I'm good. Are you still in church?
Hi.
Are you still not in church?
Yeah, we haven't opened the sanctuary yet.
Yeah.
So
Just because we're at 17.
we're going to talk about it at the board meeting this coming Sunday. So,
Uh-huh.
yeah.
Seems to be the theme.
We're going to go ahead and get started. And in a minute, I'll just kind of lay out what we're intending to do tonight. But I want to have an opening prayer, and I want to ask my colleague, the Reverend Dr. Pulley, to lead us in an opening prayer.
Okay, let's just take a moment to center ourselves in the presence of God. Take a deep, conscious, cleansing breath, to hold it and to release. To breathe in again, hold it, and let it go. To inhale one more time, hold it, and slowly exhale. Our hearts are filled with gratitude and appreciation for this opportunity to come together as spiritual beings to have a conversation about our unity, about our equality, about our stories. We open our hearts and our minds for healing, for understanding, for growth, for communication, and that we all will continue to unfold and evolve to be the best versions of ourselves so that we can live our best lives. And we pray that thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And we wrap our entire community, our cities, our counties, this country of the United States, countries all over the earth, every continent and every culture, in light and in love. And we hold the vision of our wholeness and our perfection, seeing a world that works for everyone. It is in the name and through the power and in the awareness of all that is God and all that is good. It is so, and so it is, and so we let it be. Amen and amen. Thank you, God.
Amen. Thank you. Well, I wanted to just take a couple of minutes here to describe what happened and why we're all here tonight. Last Thursday evening, I guess I should start by saying on Thursday evenings, we've been doing a spiritual discussion group. It went online like everybody else did back in March. And we were kind of wringing our hands as a few white people talking about what's going on. And the question came up, it's like, are we, what do we really need to know? How many of us really understand white privilege? And then what can we do to really be effective? What can we do to affect change? So out of that discussion, I decided to call, Darrell Pulley and Reverend Linda McLeod over there in St. Pete. I knew that they, led African-American congregations, or at least majority African-American congregations. And so that's how that was the genesis of this. And then just kind of planning it over the week. And of course, great ideas are caught by great minds. I saw several forums on this. I got to watch Oprah Winfrey's two-part series on this, where she had a panel of 10 people, and also the A&E network did a nice discussion of it too. So I guess first I shall describe what I think white privilege is, and both Darrell and Linda can certainly help school me on that. But white privilege is basically constructed to be invisible to white people, which is why so many of us did not know, what this was all about. But when I get up, I don't have to be worried about that I'm going to be denied service at a variety of businesses. I don't have to worry that if I'm looking for a house or an apartment, I'm going to be denied the opportunity to have that. I don't get followed by security or by security cameras when I enter a department store. I'm not accused of not being able to afford something expensive. I don't see people when I'm walking on the sidewalk cross over to the other side of the street, so they don't come near me. I don't get onto an elevator and see women clutching their purses. I don't get bullied solely on the basis of the color of my skin. And when I'm stopped by police, while I might be a little anxious, I'm not concerned that I'm going to be killed. And I don't have to have a conversation with my child about how not to get killed when they encounter police. I did hear someone say, that the fact that we have to ask these questions, kind of shows that in some ways that we're complicit because we weren't aware. But my feeling is like, hey, you've got everybody's attention now. And I did hear an interesting observation. It's like, what made the death of George Floyd the straw on the camel's back? And in one of those panel discussions on TV I was describing, the one woman said, the fact that the video ran for 8 minutes and 46 seconds with Officer Chauvin kneeling on the neck of George Floyd, and the fact too that both George Floyd's face and the officer's face were in the frame, and the officer obviously had no concern at all about what he was doing. So we've had, but I look at the countless events like this, over the last few decades, and it's kind of like, yeah, there's just this amazing, as we call it in Unity, divine order. There seems to be this confluence of events that has come together. The pandemic and the stress caused by all of that, but also just the fact that people are watching their TVs much more than they were perhaps 3 months ago. And I want, my intentions, I really want this to be a tipping point. I know when I facilitated group counseling, or when I participated in group counseling, just hearing someone else tell a story of their pain or of their hurts or of their fears, I seem to have a vicarious healing within myself as well. So the intention here is just for, especially those of white, and I know I put in the description of this, the quotation marks white and black, it's like, well, no, we're peach and brown, really, but just being willing to listen without getting defensive, to allow ourselves to feel a little uncomfortable tonight, and just what are the ideas to have effective change. So I wanted to introduce you to Reverend Linda. I know she did a presentation at Unity's regional here just last year. She's a graduate of Tuskegee Institute. She got a BS in electrical engineering, so she went to work for Honeywell and worked for them for 35 years. And during her career at Honeywell, she was the leader in helping to make diversity programs work. She was instrumental in creating the African American Diversity Group titled Honeywell Black Employees Network. She says, we developed programs to provide training and upward movement for African Americans at Honeywell nationwide. But she was also a member of the Diversity Council. And each year that Diversity Council would work with members networks to provide programs to enhance and recognize the achievement of the diverse members of Honeywell. Linda has kind of been professional in just helping, certainly helping Unity ministers, get a better grasp of diversity as we understand it to be. But time for me to shut up and let Linda take it from here. And then after Linda kind of shares what she wants to share as we start this conversation, then we'll go to Darrell.
Hi. Yes, I was been thinking about what I'm going to say for a couple of days now, and I grew up privileged, and that's something that I did not know until I was in corporate America for a long time, because I grew up with the principal of my school was my mother's first cousin, or my family close. My aunt was the teacher, and I had other cousins that were in the system, and my family owned property, both sides of my family. And I think it came from, South Alabama. We were in South Alabama and Henry County and Dale County. And if you know George Wallace, George Wallace was part of my community. But I didn't grow up in that I grew up in the civil rights movement era, but we never participated from out marching and stuff. We provided funds, we provided education for all of our community members. Everybody in our community could write their name. They had to be able to read and sign their name, because they did not want them to have things taken from them with an X. And so I grew up with the idea that, we had, and if we wanted it, we need to work to attain it. We worked on a farm. I picked cotton, I hoed peanuts, shucked corn. I grew up with that idea that people were people. In our community, pastor church, we call it pastor church, was the white community. And they called my dad Mr. George. And one of the things I was asking my sister about a couple of, because when this all started, about a year ago, I started asking the question. I said, did we really grow up with this idea? And there was, at that time, we called him Mr. Jack. And Mr. Jack was our interface to what was going on, because they did not want all of the Black families to lose their property. And if you know, in Mississippi and some of the other areas, they lost property. And so we were trained, and I'm gonna use the word trained, how to talk to white people or Caucasian people. And we were trained that, you don't go out by yourself, ever. You were trained to know that if a man touched his hat, it was okay. But if he nodded his head, you didn't have anything to do with him. So we were trained as young people, yes, sir, no, sir. The one thing that my dad always said is they taught us to look a man in his eyes, never not to a person in his eyes. And then I was integrated in 6th grade. And so we didn't have Caucasian kids in our school. We had white teachers that came to teach us. And because I was one of the darker complected kids, you could tell how the teacher treated the lighter skinned kids or the kids with the long, straighter hair. That if you were, I have curly hair, I have African hair, it's curly up, it's an afro if I do anything to it. And so you could tell that they treated the lighter skinned kids better than they did the darker skinned kids. And then when we transferred to high school, because I was relatively considered smart, I had to hang out with the smart kids. So which means I hung out with the Caucasian kids. And so one of the most interesting experiences I had was I was part of the yearbook team, and we had to go to Troy State to be trained. And our teacher, who was our teacher, which was a perfectly Caucasian lady, that she loved us. I mean, she was like our mom, and she drove us, but she was pregnant, so she couldn't come pick us up. And one of the other girls' mom had to come pick us up. She had a station wagon, but her statement, she could only take 4 of the 6 kids that had went to this trip back home, which she couldn't take me and my girlfriend back because there wasn't enough room in the car. I didn't see these situations as prejudice back then, but over the years, as I've looked back to some of these incidences, you start to see it. We know it, you see it, but you don't. I did not make it part of my negativity. It was like, and so what was cute about it, the girl's mom and her best friend decided that they would catch the bus back, and the lady was gonna have to drive me and my girlfriend back with the other 2 kids. And so she ended up with all 6 of us in her car. You can just see this woman's face when she was driving. She was popping pills all the way home. It was just so powerful to watch, and then for me, I graduated because I was part of the kids that were college bound, and I didn't get to hang out with the other kids, so I was called an Oreo. So yes, I'm Oreo. Even in my interactions, I'm still called an Oreo. And then I graduated from high school and went to college, and I wanted to go to Alabama State so bad, but my dad couldn't, he was poor. So I always ended up at Tuskegee University. And I was not going to be an engineer. I was not going to be an engineer because I didn't know what engineering was, but I had white professors, and I'll say this, white professor that said, you are needed in corporate America. You are needed in corporate America. And so I was going to go military, forget this corporate America stuff. I'm not going to be an engineer. So they helped me to get through engineering school. And my one of my professors, he said, I want you to work for IBM. And I was like, I'm not working for IBM. I'm not working for IBM. So I worked for IBM for 2.5 years. And that's where that was my introduction to white America. I mean, I thought I had lived white America, but I had never lived white America. I had a boss that literally told me he didn't care what I did as long as I was there every day and I swept the floors. Yeah. And this is at IBM. And, but I had a team of techs and engineers. I won't say this, I always said techs are lazy, so if they can get somebody to do their job. So I was actually on the floor doing the job of the technicians because it was easier than just sweeping the floors. So with I have a 4.5-year degree in electrical engineering, not electrical, the hardest engineering to graduate in. And I did it in 4.5 years instead of the normal 5. And, but IBM was one of those corporations that, I'm gonna hurry up with this, one of those corporations that if there was something going on and somebody reported it, so somebody reported my manager couple of times, and so he got moved out of his position, and then I was promoted into a real position with people who understand my skills and talents, and then I was moving up fast, and literally the president of that location called me in and asked me what changed, and I said management. And then I went to work for I moved to Florida and started working for Honeywell, and I thought Honeywell was bad. I mean, I thought IBM was bad, Honeywell was bad. If you watch the movie, what was it, Hidden Figures?
Yes.
That is true. In 1978, that's still true. 1981, that was still
Wow.
true. It was very true. The only difference is I had to run across the street to go to the bathroom. And since I was not the first female at Honeywell, I was the first Black female. I was the second Black female, but everybody thought I was the first because management, we made a deal. I was involved in diversity council, women's councils and stuff like that. I was a volunteer for Urban League because I could talk to people. I didn't have this Black on my shoulder. I'm Black, you need to treat me a certain way. And so I was able to work with management and help bring some major changes into their organization. And because I was Black female engineer, EEO was at the peak of its time. And so I got to do a lot of the diversity training and a lot of the, and so, you said, what is white privilege? People are not trained. It's not a class you take, how to be prejudiced. It's the way you're grown, the way you're raised up. It's like this girl said, she said, nobody told me to grab my purse. I saw the women in front of me doing it. Nobody told me not that I couldn't date this African-American person, but whenever I brought their name up, it was taboo or taking you away from that environment, because kids were taken out of my high school and sent to private school because they were making friends with African-American kids. And so it's not to me, it's taught, it's like we have, and we were taught how to be Black. You know, we had to work harder, be smarter. We had to know how to, I don't know about a lot of other people, but I was taught if I wanted to be successful, I had to be able to overlook a lot of stuff that happened to you as part of the organization. And so one more story I'm going to tell you. Honeywell there was a lawsuit that was brought against Honeywell. And one of the things that they had that happened out of that, they asked me and they said, why aren't you having any problems? I said, because I put on my rose-colored glasses every day when I come here and I don't see it. I trained a lot of the young African-Americans that came into the organization how to be successful, and because of our Black organization, the women's organization, we had a Hispanic organization, we had an Asian American organization, because we worked together to try to support those groups moving up. When I started at Honeywell in 1981, we had one African-American vice president, one. And through the years, they promoted several into those positions. And so, but then the 90s hit. What happened in the 90s? We had a lot of layoffs. A lot of people lost jobs. And so then we were back into, we don't do EEO anymore. We just have to keep people. And guess who got laid off first? African-Americans. So you said, for me, what is it that can change is that people of privilege need to look at what make me privileged and what make me dislike someone. And here's the issue. You don't even know that you dislike us. It's like you said, when you walk in the store and it happened to be lots of time, I have an engineering degree, I can make a dime. You walk in and you put a certain purse on the counter and the lady says to you, that purse costs over $200. And you go, so? And then you slap out your American Express credit card, or cash, it's not conscious. If it was conscious, you would know it. It is an unconscious reality that you guys live in that you don't even see and even know it. It's unconscious. And so to how you shift and become conscious of it. Watch what happens to you when you come near an African-American person or a Hispanic person or a gay person, because it's not just that distrust is not just, it's of all people of color. You have scenarios that you say about each one of them that is totally unconscious. If you sit down and say, what do you think of Black people? I don't think of Black people. I want you to see color. I want you to see Black people. I want you to see Hispanic people. I want you to see gay people, because I want you to see them as people, not as a race or a gender or something, but I want you to become conscious of what has that person had to go through. What are the shifts and changes? And one of the other things that happened, I was talking to the CEO of Unity Worldwide Ministry. And he says, well, I've never dealt with prejudice. I said, how many women did you see lose jobs or should have been promoted into a position that white was promoted into? And he goes, oh yeah. I remember women that I thought should have been promoted and they never got promoted. I said, did you say anything? He said, no, that was part of the culture. So we don't say anything because it's ingrained in us. We can't say anything because we're not conscious of it. So how do you become conscious? And that's, I guess, part of the conversation we'll be had tonight, is how do you become conscious that you are? And this guy said, there's a book, can't think of the name, and I'll bring it up for you. But he says, if you say, I'm not racist, you're racist. If you say, I don't see color, you're racist. Because because you're saying you don't see it, which means you do see it, but you've been trained to say, I don't see it. Learning to see people, and then it's got to come from your heart. It's got to come from connection to your own awareness of who you are and how you're relating to people. And that is, women say, well, privileged women don't even know that they're in that situation, and then they pull down other women because it's part of that training that's brought into you from the time that you're a baby. And it's not just blacks and white. We have a lot of prejudice. My sister, I'm gonna share her. I always share her story. We grew up in the same household. She was prejudiced. She was literally prejudiced. She hated white people. I mean, you wouldn't know it from her being around you, but the energy that was in her. And she said what changed her was when she started working with children. And she said what she saw was children that were hurting. And she stopped seeing white children, black kids. She saw hurting kids. And that was when she shifted and changed and realized that all of us are trained to be who we are. And it's a matter of untraining. That the untraining is, you got to know it's there. And if you don't know it's there, how can you fix it? It's like if that red rose is in front of me and it's always there and then someone takes it away, then I might notice it. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, Linda. Dr. Pulley.
Good evening, everyone. And thank you, Reverend Linda, for sharing your story. There were so many pieces of your story that I was able to connect with. And looks like I'm the only African-American male that is present here.
Actually, you've got Elvon there. Elvon is
Where's
actually a
Elvon?
combination black and Native American.
Hey, Elvon, how you doing? Wonderful, wonderful. I'm feeling a little better already.
Oh yeah, and you got Faye Gentles, and Charles is sitting next to her. So they're
Good,
members
good.
of Unity of Tampa. So yeah.
Good. And so thank you so much, Reverend Bob, for the invitation to come and share. Thank you, Unity of Tampa, for sponsoring this evening. I'm just full of gratitude and appreciation to be able to have this conversation and to have so many of you take time to have this conversation, to be a part of this conversation, to find value in this dialogue. It says a lot that you're interested in having the conversation. And so I'll start with my story. And I have to say that this is the first time, Bob, that I've put together this story like this. Like Linda, I was trying to figure out what it was I was going to say. And so it is in this context that a lot of things came up for me that I don't know that I had really processed or thought about until preparing for this conversation. So I just like to say that I'm healing as well through this conversation. So, and that's the consciousness that I'm holding, is that this will be a healing experience, that we won't just talk about the problem, the seeming problem, but we'll also talk about solutions, that we will not just talk about the seeming issue, but we'll also talk about resolution. Not just the question, but we'll come up with some answers that will cause us to be able to grow and evolve along this path towards wholeness and this love journey that I believe is the journey of every soul. So I'm going to go all the way back to my grandmother. The first time I kind of was introduced that there was a difference between blacks and whites was that my grandmother, Dr. Lanita Brown, she moved from Baltimore City. I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. And she moved from Baltimore City to the suburbs, which was called Randallstown, Maryland. And on the street, Sybil Road, where she lived, she was the first Black person on the street. And so she integrated the block, that she had a home built, as they say, from the ground up. I don't know how she built a home, but from the ground up. But she built a home in Randallstown. She was an educator and a successful woman. And I remember being on that street, going to my grandmother's house and not seeing anybody else on the street that looked like me. And so at that point, I realized that I was different, that we were different. We were the only people of color on that block. So that was my first inclination to differences between blacks and whites and feeling like a minority. Because prior to that, I was raised in the inner city where most of the people in my neighborhood were African Americans. I remember continuing to go to my grandmother's house and children in the neighborhood started knocking on the door and asking, they couldn't say my name, Darrell, so they called me Ralph. And they said, can Ralph come out and play? And they were very nice to me. I knew that we were different. I knew that I was Black and they were white, but it didn't seem to matter. They were very nice to me. You know, I kept trying to teach them how to say my name. My grandmother said it's important that you teach people to say your name, door as in door and rel as in relish, that my name is not Ralph. And they worked on learning how to pronounce my name and learning how to say it right. So this early experience, I knew that I was different, but that difference was a little uncomfortable, but the people on the block were pretty nice and we got along as children playing together. As I continued to evolve, I remember with my mom was an interviewer or a surveyor back in the 70s, and she worked for Gallup Poll and different interviewing companies when new products would come on the line. And she worked for two white women who were wealthy women in Baltimore who kind of channeled these projects from Gallup and different surveys. And I remember them being very nice to me. I remember Miss Alma and Miss Alma Hafansky and Miss Considine being nice to me. They brought me birthday gifts. I got gifts at Christmas. My mother got a bonus. I got a bonus too for her work. So I grew up feeling like, you know, white people were different than I was, but they were okay. I didn't see it as a problem. But we still lived in the inner city, and these were still people living in the county. So the experience was different, but I didn't feel prejudice. I didn't feel discrimination. I didn't feel racism. So when I was 8, we had a fire in, which was an electrical fire, and we had to, you know, our apartment where we lived in the inner city was lost. There was a suitcase, and we got to move to the county. That we moved from out of the inner city of Baltimore into Baltimore County. And this is during my middle school and high school years. And so now I'm going to school, schools that are integrated. I guess they were about 60% white and 40% African Americans at the time that I went there. In the neighborhood, we bought a house. We didn't build one from the ground up, but we bought a house. And the neighborhood was kind of mixed like the school, 60% white, 40% African Americans. We were probably what I would say middle class. And as a result of the lawsuit that was settled from the fire. And so, but the white children in school were my friends because I was in a GATE program. It was called Gifted and Talented Education. So it wasn't about being Black or white, it was about being smart or not. And so in my high school, it wasn't about whether you were Black or white, it was about whether you were with the smart kids or the average kids or the slower kids. And so I grew up with with a lot of white children as my friends. We worked on committees and things in high school together because we were smart. Made a decision to go. I got a full scholarship to HBCU, which is a historically Black college or university. I went to Morgan State University, and the college was 95% African American. So I went there feeling like I'm among my people. I had white professors, instructors, and they were different. That my white professors, we could call them by their first name. My African-American professors, you called them Dr. So-and-so or Professor so-and-so. There was a difference. So I did notice that difference early on in college, that the African Americans, you put a handle on their name, but the white professors, you could call them Susie or John or Bob, and you know, they didn't care about it. So I did notice that. For graduate school, I went to PWI, which is a predominantly white institution, and Loyola, it was a completely different culture. You know, there was very little difference between the professors and the students. It was community. We were all kind of one and unified, and it was a very pleasant experience. I hope you can see where this story is going. And so when I came to Unity Temple of Truth Church, and that was a big speed in 2014, when I got to the congregation was predominantly African American. And slowly the congregation started to turn. More and more whites began to come to the congregation. And what started out, I would say when I got there was maybe a 95% African American congregation. The height of my ministry there, it probably got to 55-45, with the slant of African Americans being 55 and whites being 45. And I remember the feeling of the African Americans in the congregation is like, these white people are not coming here and taking over our church. Our church. We were the first African American Unity Church that was built by and for African Americans, and these white people are not coming and taking over our church. And so, as a spiritual leader, I had to work to see how even though we were worshiping together in the same congregation, to deal with these issues of racism and prejudice and discrimination and white privilege among a unity congregation where we're all spiritual beings made in the image and likeness of God, and we're all one and all of that. But that was the teaching and the philosophy, but it was not the spirit of the congregation. And so as a spiritual leader, I had to work to see how we could be truly integrated, that we could become one church, as opposed to we go to one building and then as soon as service is over, you get on 275 and go this way, and then we go into South St. Pete. And so we had what we called Adventures in Consciousness. And we had people in the congregation. We came out of the Bible study in the church and we went to where people lived, worked, and played, and had people to go. I think in other places might have been called spirit expressing. So you might have an idea what that was like. So we went to people's homes, and Black people got to go to white people's homes, and white people came to Black people's homes. And it was a very uncomfortable kind of situation. And I kept encouraging them to move through the discomfort. And we talked about what it was like of us integrating as a congregation. And then also during that time, a lot of clergy people, African American, I got a lot of invitations to breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I thought that they just wanted to get to know me. But the question was, how did you get those white people in your church? That was the question. I said, I wish I knew. I would bottle up and sell it. I don't know what, but it just keeps evolving and it keeps growing and it keeps happening. But I'm not doing anything to make it happen. It's just kind of happening. And so, people felt that the 11 o'clock hour on Sunday was the most segregated hour of the week, because you had Black church and you had white church. And then you had this inner city congregation that has a mixture of Blacks and whites and some Latinos and a few Asians there, that caused the church to be multicultural and diverse. And so we had to work through that as a congregation. And just as simple as people eating at fellowship time, I remember getting between two members where the person who served the food, was very adamant about people washing their hands and using a fork and not, directly touching the food. And she was an African American woman, and there was a white woman who just said, "Oh, that looks so good," and she just grabbed it and she smacked her hand and said, "Don't you dare touch that table with your unworn. Don't you see the hand sanitizer? Don't you see?" And it wasn't during COVID-19. It was like, "Don't you see these forks and that? Don't you dare touch this food." And the white woman was mortified because, and I'm just giving you a small example. She said, I didn't think of it like that, but it was a cultural thing where it was okay from her background to just, take a little piece of it. And from that culture of African Americans, it was totally unacceptable. And so we had to start talking about those kinds of things and not smacking people's hands and how this would play out in a congregation. And fast forward a little further, I've only, as an African-American male who's getting ready to be 50 years old, I've only had 2 instances of prejudice or discrimination that I am aware of in my whole entire life. And both of those have happened since I've moved to Florida. In 2014, I moved to Florida, and both of them happened since I've moved here to Florida. When I first moved here, I lived in Carolina, and across from Almaton was Feather Sound. And I had some members who lived in Feather Sound. And my first instance of racial profiling, police, not brutality, but injustice and discrimination was that I was watching their house while they were out of town. I had some members that lived in Feather Sound, and I had guests from out of town. And so they had a big house, they weren't in town. I had an apartment, my kids and all were there. So I was going to stay at their house, during the time. And I had a key, I had a code and all of that. And so I went, this was Good Friday night, I remember. Good Friday, and I put the key in the door and started moving my things in, and I went to the car and noticed that my car was blocked in the driveway, and there was a white man in his car on the phone with the police, and he said 6'1" black man, about 200. He's entering the home. And so I'm approaching his car. He's approaching the car now. And I said, excuse me, he's talking to me now. And he's giving the police, instead of talking to me, he's having a blow-by-blow encounter with the police about everything that I say. And I said, excuse me, why are you blocking my car, in the driveway? I showed him my key. I told him I had a code. I told him that they had invited me to be in their home. I gave their names, and every piece of information I gave him, he gave to the police. And I saw that he was not going to interact with me. So I called the people who owned the home on my cell phone, put it on speaker, and said, can you tell this man, he lived next door, who had just come in a suit, he had just come from church, it was Good Friday, that I'm authorized to be in your home. And so they told him, we told you that we were having guests come to our home, and he said, but you didn't tell me that he was coming. And they kept saying, what do you mean that he was coming? What he was trying to say was, you didn't tell me that it was going to be a black person coming into your home. And so I'm on speaker with them. He's talking to the police, and he says, well, the owners of the home say they've given him permission. And so he moves from having my car blocked in the driveway, and he moves next door. He never speaks to me. He never apologizes. He never says that he was wrong, excuse me, or anything. He just goes into his home, and that's the end of the conversation. That was my first experience. I was in my 40s of feeling prejudice, feeling racism, discrimination from directly from a white person. I was assistant principal of African American inner city high school, and we had young white interns that would come, and they came with an idea of a missionary mentality that the administrators would say that we've come to help the little Negro children. That was the attitude, that we are here, instead of getting to know them, instead of getting to understand the culture, to understand them as people, it's like we're going to elevate them. We're going to lift them up. We're going to give them class and social skills and grace, as opposed to building relationship and rapport. But at that point, I was in a position of power because I was an administrator. I was assistant principal of the school. So I was not as impacted by this idea of white privilege. And I was able to talk about how it was going to happen because I was in power. The second instance that I had of prejudice, again, happened in Florida, and it happened in that same community, Feather Sound, where I had got into walking. And so I was walking from Caroline to Feather Sound, to members of the church's home, because we were going out, and I walked instead of drove. And I was stopped by the police. And the police asked me, where do you live? And I told him, and he said, why are you in this neighborhood? And I said, I'm going to visit my friends. He says, so we've gotten several calls that you've been lurking around in the neighborhood and you've been looking into people's cars and attempting to break in. And I'm like, what? And so at this point, I'm a spiritual leader. I know the chief of police. So I had him on speed dial. So I called Chief Holloway on my phone and gave the badge number and told him about this officer, and this officer was reprimanded. But if I didn't know Chief Holloway and if I didn't have his number on speed dial, I don't know how that conversation would have continued. And so for me, I feel like it's not just white privilege, but I think as an African American male, I had been sheltered from racism and prejudice and discrimination because of the education privilege. I don't believe that all African Americans are looked at the same. I think that when you have education, I think, and you can articulate and enunciate words, I think that it kind of brings it down a little bit. And then when you have financial privilege, when you have a couple dollars, coins that you can rub together and buy a nice car and a nice house and have a little bit of money in the bank, I think it brings it down a little bit. And then I think when you're in positions of power, like being a spiritual leader, being an assistant principal of a school, being a bishop of an organization, I believe those things are privileges because I really didn't believe, and I'm going to be honest, I really didn't believe that this was a thing. I believe that people were making it up. I believe that, this is in people's minds, it's their imagination. We have an African American president, that's over, that was back then, this is now. Come on, get off your soapbox and let it go. Until those instances happened to me in Feather Sound, coming from Carolina, right across the road, but it became real. And real in the sense that it's in a part of the illusion when it happened to me. So I think that in addition to white privilege, because when I grew up, there was also PWT. I don't know if y'all familiar with that. It's called poor white trash, where even though people were white, if they were not educated, if they did not have finances, if they did not have positions or titles, they were discriminated against as well. I don't know that I completely buy into that it's just a white privilege thing. I think that's a part of it. But I think that people who have education in America have a certain amount of privilege. I think people who have a certain amount of money and a certain income bracket have a certain amount of privilege. I believe that people are in positions, like even during the current protests that we're having in St. Petersburg, I can talk to the chief. I can talk to the mayor directly, because I got a little bit of education, I got a little bit of money, and I got a couple titles behind my name. And so one of the young ladies was saying, he'll talk to you, but he won't talk to me. And we both were Black. So I think that there are degrees of this privilege. I don't think it's just one whitewash thing that you're either white and you have white privilege or you're Black and you have no privileges. I think that it's a bigger issue of discrimination, racism, sexism, ageism, classism, that all of these things divide us. And I think right now, what we're highlighting, what we're focusing on is white privilege and what happened as a result of George Floyd's being killed by white police. And I could go into a whole nother thing about that, but I won't. But I think the way we heal it is that we all look at ways that we're privileged and all look at ways that we see ourselves different from other people. And that we all look at ways that we treat people differently or buy into the different treatment of people because of their race, because of their education or lack thereof, because of their finances or lack thereof, or because they don't have a position or title. I think that that's just the tip of the iceberg. But I think white privilege is the tip of a much deeper conversation that needs to be had on so many different, and I don't want to dominate the conversation outside.